Hi, I'm Michelle Pegler of Gingy Makes Quilts, and I've got a pretty exciting video for you today. I'm going to be doing some experiments with quilting on my Handi Quilter Pro Stitcher, and the goal being to determine the best way to avoid a Cuddle fabric backing from pulling through the quilt to the quilt top. So the reason I am interested in this for me is, as I've mentioned on lots of videos, I like to use Cuddle backings for pretty much every quilt that is going to be on a person. If it's on a wall, I'm fine using a cotton backing, but if it's a quilt that's going to be on a bed or on a couch and actually be used to cuddle under, I find that Cuddle backings are really the coziest way to finish off a quilt. However, you do get a problem sometimes with Cuddle backings where the pile of the backing can kind of start pulling through to the front. And so you might see that on some of the quilting that's on the front of the quilt. So, it's kind of been hit or miss. I've done a lot of quilts with Cuddle backs, and on some, I never see it pull through to the front. And then on others, I did a Christmas one recently that had a bright red backing, and there was some cream color fabric that I had used as the background on the front, and I could kind of see a little bit of red pulling through to the front as it was being quilted. When it was all quilted, it was not noticeable, and I would never point that out to someone, and no one has ever pointed it out to me, because you may know if you're a quilter, other people don't usually notice your mistakes. But this is really important for me right now because I'm about to use this gorgeous mallard color Cuddle backing on like rainbow quilt top, and in the rainbow there are light pinks and light blues and light yellows, and so I'm just really worried about this color pulling through to the front and showing on the front, because I really want those rainbow colors on the front to be able to shine and use kind of a light neutral thread color for the quilting that blends really well on all the different colors. And so if this is pulling through, it's going to be really noticeable. So all that being said, I'm excited to experiment a little bit. I rummaged through my scraps that I have from old projects. I happen to have a pretty large scrap of black Cuddle fabric from a prior quilt I've made. So I'm going to use this as a backing. I have a good amount of a solid white cotton for the quilt top. And then I have two different kinds of batting that I'm going to try. I've got a pure 100% cotton batting as well as an 80-20 cotton polyester blend. The blend, the 80-20, is usually what I like to use for my long arm quilting. I've got a whole bolt of it, but if I do find that the cotton is better for not having the backing pulling through, I will go ahead and use cotton batting on this quilt. We'll just have to see. The other things that I'm going to be varying in this experiment are thread type, so like thread weight. I've got some 40 weight threads and some 50 weight threads. I'm also going to vary the needle size and play a little bit with the tightness of the backing itself, so like how tight the Cuddle fabric is pulled or stretched on the rollers that are on the long arm, because with Cuddle fabric there is quite a bit more stretch than cotton, and I think there's kind of a range of acceptable tightnesses. And so I'm always like, when I'm advancing the quilt, I kind of look under it like, okay, it's sagging this much, should I tighten it a couple more clicks or should I leave it? So I'm going to play around with all that, and I'm essentially going to do every combination of things. So I think I'm around 16 different combinations that I'm going to try out on these scraps, and then see what the best combination looks like in terms of not showing that black backing pulling forward onto the white front. In terms of other things I'm trying to keep in mind is I want it to mimic my normal quilting setup as much as possible. So I thought, well, I could just do some free motion quilting on it to see, but I'm actually going to use the Pro Stitcher, set it up as a continuous edge to edge design so that it's moving itself around at its normal speed. I could play with the speed as another variable, but I'm going to see if one of these 16 combinations gets me a good result without messing with the speed. of the Pro Stitcher machine. And then the other thing that I wanted to mimic is the idea of having both curved portions of the quilting design and points, because I have noticed that when it's doing like sharp direction changes, like if it's doing a star and it has to do star points, oftentimes it's at the point where the momentum or the tug of the needle is the spot where it might pull the Cuddle backing through to the front. So that's what's going on with this video, and I will show you a bit of the process, and then I will kind of explore the results with you, and we'll see what the best setup is for using Cuddle backings to avoid this issue. So let's get going. I have it all set up to start my experiments. I decided to go with this fairly simple flower edge-to-edge design because it does have those sharp points and spots where it needs to change direction, as well as some nice curvy parts. I have my plan here of what each row is going to be in terms of the backing, batting, thread, needle combination. So I'm starting pretty much with my normal setup here, where I'm using 40 weight thread with my normal 80/20 batting and a size 18 needle, which is the proper needle for this size of thread. And then in terms of the backing tightness, this is what is normal to me. So I'll show you. There's still a bit of a sag in it, but I have been told that you don't want to over tighten the backing or the top. It can put more strain on the thread and the needle as it's trying to go around. So this is generally how tight I make my backing. So you can kind of tap on it. It's got a little spring to it, but it's not really tight. The tight portions on here, I'll show you what that looks like. It's going to look different. So far, I did base the edges, and they're looking really good in terms of not pulling that black Cuddle fabric through. As you can see, I'm using a white thread, so if any black fluff was coming through, it would be really noticeable. You do see a hole, of course, because the needle had to poke through, and you can kind of see through to the black, but like over time, those holes get smaller just as the quilt gets washed and used. So I'm gonna get started. I have done the first 4 rows, and I am already seeing such a difference between these rows and what the result looks like. I'm so glad I'm doing this experiment. I would never have known that they would be this different with just all I've changed so far is the type of thread and the needle size. And you can see, like right now, row 2 is definitely the best, where you don't really see black at all. You just see that like beautiful white quilting thread, versus rows 3 and 4, both look pretty bad. It's not that the fluff is necessarily pulling all the way through for most of these, but you can definitely see each puncture of the needle looks like a black dot, because I think it is partially pulling through that stitch. So I'm about to advance to do another 4 rows, and on the next 4 rows, I'm gonna be doing a much tighter back. So I'm going to be ratcheting the poles much tighter, and I'll show you that in a minute. This will be the last progress shot before we start looking at some results, but I just wanted to show you the difference now with the backing much tighter. It's nearly flat, and if I bounce it, it is just really, really tight. I could maybe even go 1 notch tighter. I never tighten my backings this much. We'll see what it looks like. All right, it is verdict time on all of these test rows. You can see I've got each one labeled here. I'm going to show you how they look and which ones look the best to me. So I'm going to come a little closer. I noticed that rows 1 and 2 look really nice. You do not see any of the black backing pulling through. Versus like rows 3 and 4, you are getting more of that black poking through on each little stitch. And let's see, so rows 1 and 2, let's go down. You can see row 7 looks pretty good. Row 10 is really nice. I mean, when you see these things next to each other, it's really obvious that some just look a lot better. So I'm very glad I did this experiment. I mean, you can really see, you know, that black pulling through to the front in these spots. And then row 15 looks really nice too. So I consulted my grid here of what each setting was and figured out that overall, all the rows that look the best are using a 40 weight polyester thread. All the other rows that don't look as good are the 50 weight cotton thread. So that was one big takeaway that I had. I should definitely be using 40 weight thread. So like for instance, this is a 40 weight thread and this is a 50 weight. So you can see that looks much better. And then the other things I noticed were that if you look at the areas where I was testing out the tightness of the backing, so like row 2 versus row 7. So row 2 and row 7 are essentially the same settings, except row 2 had a normal backing tightness on the rollers, and row 7 is where I over tightened it. They're both pretty good, honestly, but to me, row 2 looks a little better. So I will not be over tightening my backings. And then I will also show you row 2 compared to row 10. This is row 2 and 10. The only difference between these rows is the type of batting. So the top row is the 80-20 cotton polyester blend, and row 10 is the 100% cotton. So honestly, these look about the same to me. I think what that means is either batting is gonna work well as long as it's high quality batting. So overall, the best results I think you can get with using a Cuddle back with high contrast is to use a 40 weight thread. All of these that look the best are using a size 16 needle. Now, the 40 weight thread says you're supposed to use a size 18 needle, which is a slightly larger needle. And you can see the difference between that here in rows 1 and 2. So row 1 is using the proper needle for this thread, and row 2 is using that slightly smaller needle. And so what that does is it makes a smaller hole as it's going through the fabric. I generally use a size 18 needle, but I might try to use a 16 on the next one. And my only concern is that it's going to be adding extra stress on the thread and it might break the thread. So we'll have to see if I get a lot of thread breakage. If it does break, I'm going to go ahead and switch to the proper size 18 needle. But yeah, both of these results look pretty good, but I do think row 2 looks a little better, and that's using that smaller size 16 needle. And then between battings, I would say there's not really a big difference. I think either batting type would work well, and then it's really important to not over tighten the backing. Follow up on the results of using those settings for Cuddle backs. Yeah, it turned out really good. I was really worried about this light yellow getting any of this dark teal poking through, but you can see that it's really not happening. I did go ahead and use the smaller size needle, even though it's not recommended for this thread size, but I have not had any issues with it. No breakage, stitches look good. So I think that might be my new go-to. Thanks for watching.